Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices for Implementing Automotive Cybersecurity Management Systems based on ISO, SAE 21434, and UNECE R155. Your presenters today are Dr. Juan Pimentel and Vignesh Sambandan. Juan is a principal consultant with deep expertise in systems engineering, safety, and cybersecurity, particularly in EV/AVs and in-vehicle systems. He brings decades of hands-on experience in product development and compliance for advanced automotive technologies. Vignesh is a seasoned cybersecurity consultant with global expertise across OEMs and Tier 1 suppliers. He specializes in in-vehicle networks, diagnostics, ADAS, and electric vehicle systems, with a strong focus on ISO SAE 21434, CSMS framework, process design, and threat modeling. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat and we will address as many as we can at the end of the webinar. Now, please join me in welcoming Juan and Vignesh.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thanks, Kelsey, for the quick introduction. I'll share my screen and I'll continue the webinar, all right? All right. So good morning and welcome you all to this webinar on best practices for implementing automotive cybersecurity management system. So my name is Vignesh. I, along with Dr. Juan Pimentel, will be presenting this webinar to you. So I will start this webinar. We primarily will focus on these areas in this particular webinar. So a lot of you who have joined today will be working on automotive cybersecurity primarily, and some of you will be responsible for implementing a cybersecurity management system at the vehicle manufacturer level or at a component manufacturer level. So key standards that are driving this particular cybersecurity management system globally are, one is the regulation UN R155, and the other one is the standard ISO SAE 21434. So these regulation and standard have a lot of requirements on implementing cybersecurity management system. So we will be focusing on these requirements to start with, and then we will be focusing on the best practices. So our webinar will start with the scope of the regulation and the standard from the perspective of the CSMS, then the CSMS requirements that are referred in R155 and 21434, and then focusing on the best practices and key points to note. All right. So before we go to the first slide, we have a quick poll to everyone here. So please answer this question. There will be a pop-up on the screen. So which best describes your current organization? I'll give you around 10 to 15 seconds to answer this question. All right, so we have the results here. So a lot of people are from vehicle manufacturers and component manufacturers, and some of them are from service providers as well. Okay, thanks for your answers. So we'll continue with our slides. So let's take a quick look at the scope of 21434 and R155. So R155 is the UN regulation we are all aware about. So the regulation focuses primarily on the passenger cars, the commercial vehicles, including the trailers, quads, and motorcycles as well. Motorcycles has been a recent addition to this particular regulation. And 21434, or the ISO SAE 21434, is the standard we are talking about. So the standard here focuses on all the series production road vehicles primarily. And the primary focus is on the electrical electronic systems, including their components and interfaces. And the cybersecurity standard globally that is available currently is the ISO SAE 21434 that is widely followed. If we look at the regulation and standard, what they primarily talk about, the R155 requires a cybersecurity management system to be in place. The CSMS is defined here. So the CSMS is a systematic risk-based approach defining organizational process, responsibilities, and governance to treat risk associated with cyber threats to vehicles. So R155 primarily focuses on the cybersecurity management system at the vehicle level, entire vehicle level. And then we have 21434. So the 21434 is the standard. And this is taken from the standard, which says that this document can be used to implement a cybersecurity management system, including cybersecurity risk management. So 21434 effectively supports R155 in implementing the cybersecurity management system. To implement a cybersecurity management system using R155, you need 21434. In addition, you also need some other supporting standards as well. So we will discuss both of that. And as you can see, the central focus of the regulation and the standard here is establishing a cybersecurity management system. So, of course, there are a lot of requirements in the regulation and also in the standard, how to establish a CSMS and what to do to establish a CSMS, right? That's our core focus for today. Looking at the definition here, so a cybersecurity management system is a structured framework that ensures cybersecurity is systematically addressed throughout the automotive product lifecycle. So we are talking about a systematic framework here. So what essentially required is to systematically manage cybersecurity risks throughout the vehicle lifecycle. So we have to follow a structured process starting from establishing your governance and policies to finally supporting cybersecurity post-development, including your incident response. So ISO SAE 21434 provides detailed requirements for managing cybersecurity risks in road vehicles. And UN R155 being the vehicle level regulation, it requires that vehicle manufacturers demonstrate a cybersecurity management system to gain type approval in the regulated markets, right? That's the differentiation we are talking about. So together, both the regulation and standard will help manufacturers establish a thorough cybersecurity posture and improve their product. If you look at R155, the regulation has several requirements. So our primary interest for today's session would be the requirements for vehicle manufacturers, which is section 6 and 7 in the regulation. So 6 and 7 talks about certificate of compliance of a CSMS. So manufacturers are required to produce a certificate of compliance, a COC, for cybersecurity management system. If we look at 21434, 21434 has this particular structure with different clauses. These clauses have several requirements which will help establish a cybersecurity management system and get a certificate of compliance for CSMS. Coming back to the certification aspect, so manufacturers, in this case, the vehicle manufacturers, are required to provide an application for a certificate of compliance for cybersecurity management system to the approval authority. And this should say that the vehicle manufacturer is ready for a final approval and has implemented a cybersecurity management system. And once this is sent to the approval authority will provide a certificate of compliance. So there is a model for certificate of compliance also given in the regulation as well. And this certificate of compliance is valid for a maximum of 3 years. So as you can see, this primarily affects the vehicle manufacturers. But the vehicle manufacturers, if they have to provide a certificate of compliance, so they have to ensure that all the components inside their vehicle are also cybersecurity compliant. So this is where the role for the tier 1 and tier 2 manufacturers come in place, which says that tier 1 and tier 2 manufacturers should also have a cybersecurity management system that is established. Let's focus on the most important requirement in the R155, which says that the vehicle manufacturer shall demonstrate to an approval authority or technical service that their cybersecurity management system applies to the following phases. So CSMS should be implemented in all the 3 phases. So we are talking about the development phase, which is the time period before a vehicle is approved. It is a period of your engineering and design, development, and testing. So CSMS should be established for your development phase for all the activities in your product development. And CSMS should be implemented for your production phase. Production refers to the duration of production of your particular vehicle type. So this includes establishing security measures at your manufacturing or your production site as well. And the third requirement is the CSMS establishment at the post-production phase. Post-production phase is the period in which the vehicle is no longer produced until the vehicle reaches its end of life of its overall timeline. So cybersecurity management system metrics should be applicable in the post-production phase as well. So we will look at some of these specific requirements and how to meet them using ISO SAE 21434. All right, so here we have another quick poll. So where does your organization stand on cybersecurity management system conformance currently? Are you in the early stages of implementation, or are you working, or have you already achieved a CSMS conformance? All right, so here we have the answers. So almost 50% of the participants are in the early stages of CSMS implementation. And some of you have already achieved CSMS conformance as well. That's good to know. All right. Let's continue with our slides here. So we have identified some of the critical references that points out to cybersecurity management system in R155 and how to meet them using 21434. The first reference here says that for the assessment, the approval authority or technical service, so here every country has their own approval authorities, shall verify that the vehicle manufacturer has cybersecurity management system in place and shall verify its compliance with this regulation, right? So every manufacturer has to submit. In the previous slide, you have seen a model of submission request that their cybersecurity management system is implemented, and the approval authority will have to verify that the CSMS is in compliance with this particular regulation. So this can be met by following several standards. Standards will help you implement a systematic approach of implementing a CSMS. So starting from ISO SAE 21434, there are several clauses. So there are clauses which talks about establishing an overall cybersecurity management system in your organization by having an organizational management, by having your project management, and having your continual cybersecurity activities of monitoring during your development and post-production. So these clauses will help you develop their overall framework of establishing a cybersecurity management system. And when you implement a CSMS, the CSMS here can be part of your quality management system in your organization, or it can be an independent management system as well. Okay. If you have a CSMS, which is part of your organization's quality management system, then it should be clearly identified what are the CSMS processes that you have as part of your overall quality management system. In addition to 21434, there are a few supporting standards as well. It's primarily the 18045 and 15408, which talks about performing security evaluations. So these security evaluation standards will help you perform systematic assessments for your cybersecurity management system. So these standards have been in the industry for quite some time, and they are used for IT security evaluations. And you can use the best practices to perform an automotive cybersecurity evaluation as well. And we have ISO 31000, which is primarily a risk management standard used globally. So when you perform or implement your risk management procedures for cybersecurity, these standards will help you define a better framework in your organization. Going to the second requirement, this is something which we have seen just now, having a CSMS in your development phase and production and post-production phase, right? So in 21434, there are several clauses that will help you implement this particular requirement. If we talk about development phase, we have clause 9, which is concept, clause 10, which is product development, and clause 11, which is validation. And we also have clause 8, which is a continual cybersecurity activities, so which applies in development as well and also post-development. So production phase is primarily implemented by using clause 12, and post-production phases are implemented by using clause 8, the same as the development clause, and also 13 and 14, which talks about incident response and end of cybersecurity and decommissioning. Okay, so it is also critical that the cybersecurity management system that you implement should have both proactive and reactive procedures for cybersecurity in your organization. It should also define what is the end of support of your entire cybersecurity management system. Every vehicle will have an end of support timeline as well. So this includes planning for how risks are managed when updates or patches are no longer provided, and how the organization will respond to any threats after the support ends. So this is also a part of your establishing your cybersecurity management system. Going to the third reference here. So this says that the vehicle manufacturer shall demonstrate processes used in CSMS, and this shall include the processes within the manufacturer's organization to manage cybersecurity. So the intention here is that the organization has a set of process for establishing CSMS and implementing CSMS. And the scope of these processes are those processes that are relevant for cybersecurity. For example, we are not talking about processes like information security management system or quality management system. So those processes have separate standards by themselves, but we are specifically talking about the cybersecurity process that are required for your organization. So we have the clause 5 in 21434, which primarily lists down all these requirements, establishing a cybersecurity policy, rules and process for 21434 implementation, establishing a culture and competency and awareness requirements. And when we talk about rules and processes are for all the clauses in the standard from clause 5 to 15, all the rules and processes should be established in your organization. So the next set of references will help you understand specific clauses and requirements, starting with the processes used for identification of risks to vehicle types. So the goal here is that manufacturers need to identify cybersecurity risks to their particular vehicle, right? So this means having all the processes that identifies all the risks. And there are a set of risks given in R155 Annex 5. So the Annex 5 lists down all possible threats that can happen at the vehicle level. And it also talks about systematically mitigating those different threats. So that is something very useful. You should go and refer the R155 Annex 5. So when you do a risk identification in your organization, the Annex 5 can be your checklist, which help you verify if you have this particular threat that can affect your product or not. If that affects your product, what is the mitigation that you are supposed to have? So that is also defined in R155. Of course, that is not an exhaustive list, but that is definitely a quick guideline you can use to model your entire risks. In 21434, so we have specific requirements in clause 15, which talks about how to identify the assets, damages, and the risks, primarily using threat scenarios and damage scenarios. Going to the next reference, which is also a part of the risk here, but this is about risk assessment, categorization, and treatment of the risks identified. The most important aspect of risk identification is that how you categorize the risk and how you treat that particular risk. Let's say if we have accepted all the risks, then we do not have any additional security measures. But that's not the point we are trying to do. So we are trying to identify and treat all the risks. So a good process should have a defined strategy, how you can identify all the risks, and what is your strategy for treating that particular risk. So that is a part of establishing your overall cybersecurity management system. Some risks have to be reduced by implementing security measures. Some risks have to be transferred to other entities or other providers to ensure that the overall risk management occurs. And some risks have to be accepted as it is because of so many reasons, like the threat cannot be performed because of low feasibility. So these strategies have to be clearly defined within your organization. And 21434 clause 15 will have clear guidelines to do that. One thing that is need to be taken care here is when you refer 21434 for threat assessment, threat analysis, and risk assessment, take that as a guideline and a reference standard rather than a prescriptive standard. Do not use that as the only metric for implementing a CSMS or even threat analysis. Take that as a good reference and then add your own best practices for establishing a CSMS, because every organization, every product is unique. So you will not have a one solution to perform a TARA or any activity for that matter. The next reference is about managing that particular risk. So here, 21434 has a lot of design verification reviews and also validation activities at the vehicle level, right? So we are talking about risk management at the vehicle level here. So this could include a lot of audits and assessments within your organization and performing testing activities at the vehicle level as well, including the penetration testing activities. So which has a very specific requirement in the next slide. So the organization should have a process used for testing the cybersecurity of a vehicle type. This is a key aspect of establishing your CSMS. So here we are talking about having testing practices during the development phase. For example, you have to have specific rules during your development. You have to have specific test strategies for your systems testing, software testing, hardware testing, including functional vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. The testing activities doesn't stop at just the development phase. You have to have testing activities at the production phase as well. So the production phase testing activities can be your implementing your cybersecurity controls at the production and verifying that those controls are implemented at the production as well. Okay, so these testing practices will help you establish a strong CSMS framework as well. Going to the next reference, this is a critical requirement which says that the processes used for ensuring the risk assessment is kept current. So what this means is cybersecurity here is not a one-time activity, including the risk assessment. You don't do it only once and you call it a day. You have to have continuous monitoring and risk assessment throughout your product lifecycle. There are several platforms available, right? Vulnerability and threat sharing platforms. There are communities available like AutoISAC that will help you monitor new threats, right? And you can have your learnings from your past incidents as well. So these will ensure that the risk assessment is kept current. It's not a one-time thing. It's not something that is done only once. It is a dynamic activity that has to be completely revised throughout your product development lifecycle. So if you see, some of you might be using threat analysis, risk assessment tools. If we take an example of TARA. So these days, a lot of tools are also incorporating a practice of dynamic TARA instead of a static TARA. Right? So dynamic TARA will help you monitor vulnerabilities continuously throughout your product development lifecycle, because that is a critical aspect. 21434 doesn't say this explicitly about dynamic TARA or performing TARA at multiple times, but it talks about continuously monitoring new vulnerabilities. That is a part of your dynamic risk assessment. Okay. Going to the next reference. So this is about having processes that are used for monitoring, detecting, and responding to cyber threats. So here we are talking about processes like Vehicle Security Operations Center. So if you have to monitor, identify new threats, you have to have a threat intelligence within your organization. So this threat intelligence systems will be responsible for identifying new threats. So one good example I have given is having a security operations center. If you are at a vehicle manufacturer level, so you will have a VSOC, a vehicle security operations center. Component manufacturers also have a security operations center as well. So these operation centers are responsible for monitoring new threats, and they are also responsible for effectively mitigating those threats as well if they are monitored. So the clause 8 in 21434 talks about these monitoring activities using continual monitoring and incident response procedures, because it is not just sufficient to monitor, but also plan for effectively handling a cybersecurity incident as well. Moving to the next reference on CSMS, it talks about the processes used to provide relevant data to support analysis, right? So here it's again a part of your security monitoring and incident response. So we recommend having an incident response team within your organization, which is responsible for continuously identifying new information related to your product and effectively responding to them, right? This includes field monitoring to collect data on real-world incidents and vulnerabilities, and having clear instructions on what information needs to be shared at each stage, right? So 21434 talks about identifying sources and having cybersecurity event evaluation procedures here. So because we need effective data to support analysis internally, let's take a root cause analysis, right? So we need this information. Two more critical references to go. The first one is about our entire supply chain. So we, as a manufacturers, need to have processes to identify the dependencies that may exist with contractor suppliers, right? So automotive supply chain is huge. A lot of manufacturers providing components, providing softwares, providing tools are involved in the entire product development. So we need to ensure that cybersecurity vulnerabilities are not introduced from these entities in the supply chain. So you need to have clear metrics to identify how these risks from the contractor suppliers and the third-party entities would be identified, right? So we primarily expect organizations to have a clear identification of who are their suppliers. If they are providing a lot of software components, having a software bill of materials here effectively identifies the risks in that software and will help us track all the vulnerabilities as well. So we have a specific requirement in 21434, which is primarily the clause 7, which talks about having interface agreement. And having an interface agreement is not just sufficient. You also need to identify what to have in the interface agreement, right? So you have to evaluate your suppliers, for example, using standards like ISO 27001 or TSAX for that matter. So this will help you understand how your suppliers handle information, right? How they exchange information. And the last critical reference on implementing CSMS here is that you should have a process to report all the information to the type approval authority at least once a year, right? So what this means is you should be able to collect information. That is number one. You should have a set of process to gather information, and you should also have process to report these information about ongoing cybersecurity monitoring activities and any actions taken. So of course, the vehicle manufacturer has to do this, but the component manufacturer and service providers will have to support the vehicle manufacturer in providing this information to the type approval authority. Right? 21434 has requirements for gathering all this information and managing vulnerabilities. So these practices are required to thoroughly establish a cybersecurity management system in your organization. Our next chapter would be to specifically discuss the best practices based on these requirements. So before we go there, we have a quick poll, and then I'll hand it over to Juan to continue the session. So this poll talks about the primary challenges that your organization is facing in implementing a cybersecurity management system. All right, so we have the answers. So a lot of people commented about difficulty in defining cybersecurity requirements, which is identifying the security controls, right? So there are a lot of best practices like NIST available, NIST specifications available. Juan will be able to give more perspective into that. Okay, so I'll hand it over to Juan. Juan, please continue.
Yes, thank you. Give me a few seconds to share my screen.
So we are seeing your browser window right now.
Oh, hold on. I think I did it wrong. Let me redo it again. Sorry about that. Okay, how about now?
We are seeing two screens on the presentation.
Oh,
I believe you just have to put it into presentation mode, which is
right.
on the
Okay.
bottom. Yep.
How about now?
Yeah, good to go.
Okay, great. Good morning. This is Juan Pimentel, and I'm going to continue to the presentation that Vignesh started. Vignesh talked about the relationship between R155 and ISO 21434. So from Vignesh's presentation, you probably got a pretty good idea or a good idea about how these two are related. And in fact, it shows that if you implement 21434, that goes a long way into meeting R155 requirements. So let's turn the presentation to a little bit different topic, which is obviously related, but let's talk about best practices of implementing both, now that we know that they're highly related. I'm talking about R15 and ISO 21434. So I'll be going over several best practices to do that. So the first one is about establishing a CSMS governance and organizational structure. This is covered in both R155 and also ISO 21434. So few best practices here related to this overall best practice are listed. So starting with the commitment from top management, which is extremely important that this commitment starts at the very top. Following down to defining very clearly the roles and responsibilities of all people involved in the cybersecurity activities or projects. Moving down to clarifying the policy and procedures. On the right side, you have pretty much where in a hierarchical structure lie some of these individual documents or policies. Okay, at the high level, obviously, we have more policy-oriented requirements or practices, and at the very low level, you have more detail dealing with the procedures and stuff like that. So moving down, the next one would be awareness and training programs. The cybersecurity is a continuing topic that really people need to be continually adjusting their knowledge and competence. The next one is about communication collaboration. This is an area where a lot of people and parties and stakeholders need to collaborate. So it is very crucial that you have very good communication lines and collaboration. And finally, the last one in this best practice is continuous improvement framework. This is part of many management systems, but this is critical for cybersecurity. Best practice number 2 is related to a risk management process. Okay, so we're talking about several detailed best practices here, starting with asset identification. That asset identification is used in many industries, but for automotive, it starts with the item definition, which is a system at the functional level, moving down to performing a threat analysis based on that assets, which is based on a item definition that you perform, and then moving down to the risk assessment, where you actually estimate your level of risk. Now, on the right side, you have a picture here that's depicting one recommendation in terms of the options that are available after you do the risk assessment. I mean, you could avoid the risk, you could transfer the risk, you could accept the risk or reduce the risk. And the recommendation here is that depending upon the impact, which is horizontally, and the probability, which is vertically, you pretty much have these particular ways of proceeding to the option. So as you could see, we recommend that the probability is high and the impact is high. You use measures to avoid the risk. Whereas if you have high probabilities, we recommend reducing the risk. And likewise, if the impact is higher, to transfer the risk. And only when they're both very low, we recommend accepting the risk. So that's called a risk treatment. And as you can see, there are options on the right side. And the risk acceptance is one particular area that obviously you decide to accept the risk. And this is the possibility or the choice, rather, that you use whenever you decide to accept the risk and move forward and implement these standards all the way through. Okay. And obviously, the additional best practice related to this topic would be the monitoring of the risk and the review of the risk. Please note that a lot of these best practices have already been discussed in one way or another by Vignesh prior. Best practice 3 is related to incorporating security by design principles. Now, this is covered to a great extent by 21434, and also other standards, like here at the very bottom, you have a NIST 53, which is a set of controls that follows this particular flow of design principles. And they involve minimizing the attack surfaces, using the principle of least privilege, using the defense in depth concepts, okay, which basically amounts to what it's shown in the right figure, meaning using multiple layers of controls. And then fail securely, involving the use of a secure state, separation of concerns, which is the divide principle, basically. Dividing systems into modules, zones, whatever you want to call it. But this separation is very important. And then secure defaults for configuration, mostly. And as I said before, using other standards like this NIST 853, which is basically a database of very good controls. Best practice 4 is about development. So in this case, we're talking about a secure software development lifecycle that is typically used in embedded systems. But the best practice is to incorporate safety into this, and that's called secure SDLC process on the right side. So you could do that by taking a look at the security requirements that comes from either R155 or ISO 21434, secure coding practices, or static and dynamic security testing, third-party component management, vulnerability management, and secure configuration management. So all of this really is kind of together into a secure software development lifecycle, in addition to any SDLC process that you might have in your organization. Best practice 5 is something that is not really discussed to the great extent in 21434, but this is a best practice that really is more related to the requirements from R155. So we're talking about over-the-air update systems. Okay, so we have some mechanisms, and there are some standards, by the way, that you could implement along with this, that talk about how can you perform secure over-the-air updates. Okay, and that involves some validation verification of the updates, involves some rollback mechanisms, which is very useful in case the update doesn't work perfectly. So you could roll back to a previous state of the software that you are downloading. It involves managing version control and also doing it in a transparent way, the communications, and also the events, and also to ensure that you have a good management of the security patches that may involve in these software updates. Another best practice is about having a comprehensive security testing and validation. This came out in some of the slides that Vignesh went through. It involves basically the right side of the V model, which is shown on the right figure right here, talking about specific activities like vulnerability scanning, okay, which is very important, penetration testing. And on the right side, you would see that there is certain order in which these activities are done, meaning that the time is from left to right, of course. Well, the activities on the left side of this diagram is done prior to the activities on the right side. Another activity is fuzzing, followed by security audits, and then hardware security testing and integration testing. So as you could see, all of those could be combined, and on this figure on the right side, you could see that the top level activity, overarching activity, would be the validation of the security. Still, another best practice has to do with incident response and management. Again, this is something that it's required by both standards, R155, actually regulation R55, and the 21434, which is the standard. So we're talking about developing a very good incident response plan and obviously following it, okay? And then talking about the incident identification and the analysis of the incident. And all of that follow established processes for detecting and analyzing the security events. All of this is actually very well detailed in ISO 21434. Still, another important best practice would be the containing and eradication of some of these threats or attacks. And that could be done, for instance, implementing measures to limit the impact and remove the threats. Recovery mechanism, and then a post-incident analysis. This is very important. Once the incident happens, it is critical that it is reviewed, analyzed, and then learn from this activity and document it appropriately and report it, which is the last one, reporting communication to the appropriate stakeholders. On the right side, this is kind of depicted into a flow of activities, going clockwise. Another one has to do with supply chain cybersecurity management. The R155 states that it is the overall responsibility of the manufacturer for implementing or for that regulation. However, it turns out that the manufacturer is not alone in the responsibilities of implementing all of these requirements. It's really the responsibility of a supply chain that involves OEMs on the top here, Tier 1 suppliers in the middle, and then Tier 2 suppliers here at the bottom. So it's a combined responsibility that they need to work together. And that is done, obviously, starting off with the supplier risk assessment, okay? Making sure that the requirements of the contractual security requirements are very clear, okay? And also talk about information sharing and collaboration among all of these parties. And all of this, obviously, it needs to be done very carefully because you cannot just share anything, And 21434 establishes some requirements, some criteria as to how to do this securely. And then another one is auditing and monitoring the suppliers. And the last one is looking or paying attention to the so-called software bill of materials, which is very critical in all of these activities. And in this software bill of materials, it will become very clearly how these different parties are involved, all the way from Tier 2, Tier 1 to the OEMs. The last best practice would be the continuous monitoring and improvement. Again, this is something that's very important for R155 and also ISO 21434. And this involves, first of all, security monitoring. So monitoring all the information related to security. Moving down to whenever there is a vulnerability, to track that vulnerability and to stay informed about new vulnerabilities. And performing regular audits and assessment. This could be done internally or externally. And this is very important. There are many organizations around the world that can perform this for OEMs, Tier 1s, and Tier 2 companies. Paying attention to performance metrics and KPIs, that's also very important. That would enable to track key service security metrics, basically to measure the progress that we're making. Incorporating lessons learned, which is also a critical best practice. And lastly, to adaptation to evolving threats. Like Vignesh mentioned, cybersecurity is not static. It is a continuous thing that you need to do it throughout the entire life cycle of the product. On the right side, you kind of illustrate that using some critical events to this best practice of continuous monitoring and improvement. So to summarize then, also documenting everything is very important, okay? Especially after you have finished your development process and has been approved, So we're talking about like post-certification requirements, okay? You need to retain evidence for multiple years. You need to update the documentation with each software release, and also to track new threats and updates. And also to have version control and audit trails, using secure and traceable document repositories, or track who changed and what and when. And also the integrating it with cybersecurity monitoring system, feeding real-world incidents back into documentation, and support continuous improvement loop, and implementing and refining process to capture, document, and respond to incidents. And defining and tracking these KPIs that we talked about. And all of that really should be done with the goal of integrating with a cybersecurity management system, which is the overarching, system that will guide you through your cybersecurity efforts for your product or your organization. Okay, so with that, then we're finished with our presentation. So at this point, we are open for questions from the audience. I do not see any questions thus far. How about you, Vignesh?
There were two questions in the chat. I answered these two questions.
Can you read them aloud?
Right. I have answered them on the chat as well. So let me quickly read them for others. So 21434 and TSAX and 27001, how are they related? Right? That's the first question. So 21434 here focuses on the product security, and 27001 and TSAX focuses on the organization level information security. Right? You want to add anything to it, Juan?
No, that's perfect.
Right. And the second question is about ENX VCS. There was a question about, would you recommend ISO 21434 or ENX VCS to these customers? So the ENX VCS is a vehicle cybersecurity scheme that is an independent third-party scheme that is developed in the past 2-3 years. So ENX VCS also refers ISO PAS 5112. ISO SAE 21434 also refers to ISO PAS 5112. So 5112 is the primary auditing guideline standard. But if your customer accepts ENX VCS, you can go for ENX VCS because it's a third-party audit scheme, right? Otherwise, ISO 5112 based audits are also okay at this point because ENX VCS is not mandated right now.
Oh, okay. Here, there are two additional questions here. Can you give it a try, Vignesh?
Right. So the first question is, this is all very expensive to maintain CSMS, and what can be the most cost-effective way for the supply chain, right? So working on cloud and or use data centers for all your data storage. So CSMS is not an implementation specific requirement from both R155 and 21434. They give a general framework how to establish cybersecurity management system. So depending on your organization size and the information you handle, you can take a decision on what is the level of complexity you have to go, right? Where do you want to store information exactly, right? This is all allowed as per your information security management system and ISMS policies and the strategy that you take for CSMS. That's the best part about this. You can define your own strategy. You don't have to always go for expensive strategies. But of course, it takes time and effort to implement CSMS. But the main intention is to ensure that all our products are secure so that there are no issues when we release it on the field.
Yeah, I'll take the second question. The question is, it says, can you provide more context on the concept of software bill of materials? It is clear whether manufacturing, or is it clear whether manufacturing or assembly BOM is? Not so much to me, at least. What is a software bill of materials would be? Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, Miguel. And the answer is that I don't know, maybe you work in a different industry, but in automotive, a bill of materials, whether it's software or hardware, it's very clear when you are working on the development. In fact, the development portion of the life cycle forces you to, by the end of the development, have a unique bill of materials, okay? Perhaps not at the beginning, but by the time you're finished, you should have both a hardware bill of materials and a software bill of materials. And the reason is that you use that in order to implement the controls and to finish the development cycle. There is no way that you could do that without having a complete bill of materials. Again, this is something that may be different in other areas where you don't have a very clear understanding or cut or details actually of the actual bill of materials. Rather, they have just a industry segment and do it that way, but not in automotive. Okay, automotive, the way the standards is developed, it forces you to have this very clearly defined. Okay, great. So there's no more question. We're right at the time, 12 o'clock. So we're going to close the webinar. Thank you so much for your participation and your questions. So on behalf of Omnex and Vignesh, I'd like to thank you again and say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.